All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to night 4 of the Eco Summit 2020. It's a free webinar series brought to you by St. Francis of Assisi Care for Creation Committee. Smile pretty for the cameras because I'm going to turn on our camera feeds for a moment here while we do introductions. And I'll let the folks watching know that we won't be terrifying you with our faces throughout the entire presentation, just at least for the introductions here. So, hello, everybody. We'll kind of kick things off here in just a moment. First, I'd like to welcome you to day 4 of our first ever Eco Summit, brought to you by the Care for Creation Ministry from St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Triangle, Virginia. Once again, I recognize plenty of names in the chat from previous nights, so welcome back to all of you. But if you're joining us for the first time, we want you to know that this summit is very important to us and to our ministry. Prior to the pandemic, and Ron and Scott and I were talking about this earlier, we had been planning on doing some big event, a one-day event at the parish. And when COVID-19 arrived on our shores, we quickly pivoted and turned the one-day event into this week-long online summit. Obviously, it's not we're not able to do the in-person stuff right now, so we hope that this fills the void. This week-long series was created as a way for us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which happened just about a month ago, and the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, and that's called Laudato Si'. It's on care for our common home. So I'm Brandon Jubar. I'm the Director of Youth Ministry at St. Francis, and I'll be your host for this evening's webinar. Electric cars are great for you and for the climate. All you wanted to know about EVs and more. Believe me, if you haven't checked out electric vehicles lately, it really is time to take another look. They have come a long way since the Prius that I remember from about 20 years ago. The one we chuckled at when it puttered on down the road. We will have time for questions and answers after the presentation, but please feel free to submit questions in the chat. Better yet, put your questions in the question section, which is below your screen. If you scroll down a little, you should have a place to put in a question, and we can queue those up. Makes it a lot easier on us, Scott and I, when we're feeding the questions to Ron. And I believe that we're gonna try not to interrupt Ron too much. If a question is very pertinent to what is being said, what he's discussing, then we'll probably chime in. Some of those, we may hold those questions for the end. But trust us, we will get to all of your questions at some point. My co-host, again this evening, with a wonderful Washington Capitals t-shirt on there, Scott Dean. Scott he's a life science teacher for Prince William County Schools, where he runs a green club for middle school students. And he's a member of the Prince William County Schools sustainability team. Now, Scott has taught for 26 years in Virginia. Yes, he's been teaching since he's been about 4. Outside of school, he's a member of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C., and he co-chairs our St. Francis Care for Creation Committee. That's the team who brought this Eco Summit together. Scott will be helping me monitor the chat, as I said, and the questions that you submit, we'll make sure that your questions get answered tonight. And last, but certainly not least, I am pleased to welcome back our presenter this evening, Ron Kaltenbaugh. If you were with us on Monday night, as it looks like many of you were, you remember that Ron kicked off our summit sharing the impacts of climate change and some possible solutions. Well, he's back with us tonight to talk about one of his favorite solutions, electric vehicles. Ron is a speaker for the Climate Reality Project, and in addition to actively advocating for sustainability issues for many years, he's also the president of the Electric Vehicles Association of DC. So Ron's activities include advocating for electric vehicles and climate training with the Climate Reality Project. Ron has a master's degree in computer science, so he's a very smart dude. He got that from American University. He works as a network engineer for a Fortune 500 company. Like I said, very smart dude. One final thing to note is that Ron has been working on his own personal net zero project, including home solar, geothermal heating and cooling, and he owns 2 electric vehicles. And of course, that's what he is here to talk to you about tonight, EVs. Ron, good evening. Welcome to the St. Francis of Assisi Eco Summit 2020.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm glad to be back for a second night. And one of the advantages of just going to a week-long seminar was I get to talk twice instead of just once. So
excellent. Well, I'm going to kill our camera feeds and allow you to pull your slides up there to show everybody what you got tonight.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about EVs tonight, and with a little bit of climate sprinkled in. So for the folks over here Monday night, there's just a handful of one or two couple slides that'll be a repeat, but not very much at all. Just to put a little context for folks that haven't here before. So as was said in the introduction, EVs have come a long way, and I'm here with two hats on, and I'll describe those in a minute. But first, the pictures on the slide. One of the Brandon mentioned the Prius, and I'll get to the differences between hybrids and EVs in a few slides. But my first EV was a Nissan Leaf, this light blue Leaf up here, 2012, 84 miles of range. Then in 2016, we turned that in off a lease and got a new Leaf. We turned over a new Leaf. Sorry for the pun there. And went to 110 miles of range. Doesn't sound like a lot, but a huge difference in how far we could go and just, the more opportunity to use it. When that was off of lease, we ended up getting a Chevy Bolt, the red car there. That's 238 miles of range. And then November of 2018, we got the Tesla Model 3, which is over 300 miles of range. And I've been to New Hampshire to go skiing, and I've been to Detroit for a science event with my daughter with no problem. So we'll get into more of that as we go along. Oh, also down here, you see my name and email address. If you have, all the time they'll have questions. Won't think about it until like 10 minutes after the event ends. You can reach out to me, but my contact information will be showing up later on as you get links about the YouTube links for the event and other things. So you'll have that later as well. So a little bit about the background of where I'm coming from and the groups I'm representing. And the first is EVADC. So EVADC is the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C., which is a bit of a mouthful, so I will keep saying from now on EVADC. We're a chapter of the Electric Auto Association. EAA started in 1967, and the chapter I'm in started in 1980. And back in those days, it was all about conversions. We still have members doing this, but not nearly as much today. But we have members who have converted a Porsche 914, a BMW Z4, various other vehicles they've converted to electric. And that's what the game was until around 2010, 2011, when the Chevy Volt came out and then the Nissan Leaf. So today our focus is on those commercial vehicles, and we do all kinds of events. We're one part car club, one part advocacy group. So we do events like this. We do tabling events at parades and science fairs. We talk to elected officials about EV policy, sometimes go to Annapolis to testify on bills, and just any kind of outreach to promote EVs for their benefit both to individuals and to society. Little green logo you see at the bottom there, that's the logo for National Drive Electric Week. So our parent organization, along with Plug-in America and the Sierra Club, do this week-long event in the fall where the push is to get EVs out there in places where people are and give people an opportunity to see them. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that again this fall, depending on how things go with the pandemic. So my other hat tonight is the Climate Reality Project. And this is an effort to basically get people trained to speak about climate change. And that was my focus earlier. But EVs, as was said right before, is one of the really good solutions around climate change. And so that's why I always consider when I talk about EVs, I'm also addressing climate as well. Again, you may recognize this slide from Monday, but this is some of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases. And we're going to focus on transportation. So you see here on this picture, hopefully you can see my mouse here, there's a car here. It doesn't look like it's an electric car in this picture, but in the future it will be. And you also things like transportation, like truck transportation. Big trucks are becoming electrified as well. And so we're going to get into that. And so I just want to set the stage here that electrifying transportation is just one aspect of the solutions we need, but it's a very important one, and it's one that people can act on in their own personal lives. So one of the keys here is, besides worrying about climate, it's also about our health and the care for people around the world, especially for those who are poor or live in areas with greater pollution. Air pollution, much of which comes from vehicles, kills 9 million people a year. And this is, as I said, becomes also an environmental justice issue because a lot of these deaths are in poor areas. If someone wants to put an energy plant or something that's polluting into an area, well, if it's people that are well-to-do, they have the means to push back, to fight City Hall, so to speak, and make that thing go somewhere else. But the poorer folks don't have that opportunity oftentimes, and so they bear the brunt of this pollution at a far greater rate than those of us that are more well off. So as I mentioned on Monday, we've got the past 19 of the past 20 years have been the hottest on record, and this is showing the trend that is continuing. And the past 5 years, you can see here, are all the hottest that we've seen. And this is just a trend that we need to tackle. And I think I have one more climate slide, and then I'll get into the EV stuff. And so last year was the 43rd consecutive year where the global temperature was above the 20th century average. And this means that anybody who's younger than 43 has never seen a normal year, which is just pretty amazing when you think about it. It really sets the stage for why we need to take the actions we need to take. So let's get into the electrification of transportation. So one thing I like folks to do is if you have an EV yourself, please put something in the chat, or if you've actually ridden in one, please note that in the chat as well. I'd like to see what the group is, what their experience is. I'm just curious. So here's why transportation is so important. The power sector, you can see here, it's on a downward curve. We have the technologies. We're starting to put them at pretty decent scale, wind and solar and other forms, to address the carbon emissions of the power sector. It's on a trajectory that's downward. Transportation is kind of flat or even ticking up. One of the things that happens a lot is gas prices go down, and unfortunately, people then go out and buy these big SUVs. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense for that reaction because everyone knows the prices of gasoline will go back up. But because it's slow right now, some people kind of forget the fact that they're going to have that car for 10 years, and then they're going to complain when prices go back up. So this is why transportation electrification is so very important. So I'm going to get into some details now about EVs. And so this is the kind of things I'm going to talk about. There's 3 types of electrified vehicles. Talk about charging, talk about the benefits and efficiency, how they're cleaner and how those benefits are growing fast, and also a little bit about large vehicles and electrification of those. So there are 3 key types of electric vehicles, and this can get confusing because there's no standard terminology here. There's no correct answer, so to speak. This is the way the terminology is typically used, but sometimes vendors and manufacturers will kind of fudge on these to kind of make to their advantage. The first kind of electrified vehicle is a hybrid electric vehicle. And this is the quintessential example of this is the Toyota Prius, kind of kicked off the this technology trend. And this is where you have a small electric motor and a small battery, but no plug. And the battery gets juice from coasting and something called regenerative braking. And that motor gives the gasoline engine an assist. The theory is you can then have a smaller gasoline engine for the same performance. So you might ask, well, what's regenerative braking? So regenerative braking is when you press the brake, instead of actually just using friction to slow you down, the motor that you have actually runs in reverse and becomes a generator. Now you capture that energy and put it back into the battery, as opposed to stopping your car with friction. This does several good things. It means that you can go further because you're capturing energy, not wasting it. But it also means your brake pads last longer because they're not being used nearly as much. So a hybrid is one where you have no plug, small battery, and it just gives the engine an assist. So the next category is a plug-in hybrid. And this is examples of this are, I see someone has mentioned the C-Max. The Chevy Volt is also an example of this. And this is a case where you have a larger battery and a plug on the car, so you can actually charge it up externally to the vehicle. And typically you can go some distance, could be as little as 8 to 10 miles, in some cases 40 or 50 on just electrons and not the gasoline engine. This is a great opportunity for folks that are, maybe you're just a little bit nervous about jumping in the whole way. You can electrify most of your transportation with one of these. And but trust me, once you get the bug, if you get a plug-in hybrid, next time you'll go EV, because you'll just, I talked to so many people that got a plug-in hybrid, and they're like, it becomes a game where they just have to try to figure out how to not use the gas engine whatsoever. And they really want to all electric once they get used to the idea. And the last category is a fully electric vehicle. So here you have a battery, no gasoline engine, but also no muffler, typically no transmission, none of the things we're used to in cars, which means none of the maintenance of those things either. So a bit about charging. So EV charging falls into what are typically referred to as 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. And the plug you see there, as you look at the screen on the left-hand side, the J1772 plug, that's the standard plug that is used for both level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is any 110 outlet, 110 volts. It's going to get you 4 or 5 miles per hour of range. Level 2 is what we oftentimes refer to as a dryer circuit. It's a 240 circuit. And depending on the amps, which can vary a lot, you get anywhere from, the typical range for most EVs is between 12 and 46, depending on the car. Different cars at this level have different charging speeds. Now, the one thing I mentioned, that plug is the same for all, and that's true with one little bit of an asterisk. On the Tesla models, they have an adapter because they have one plug for all 3 levels. And so they can still use the J1772, but they have an adapter so they can use it. Main reason for that is because Tesla was out with their stuff pretty early on and wasn't waiting for the standards to catch up. So the last category here I have there is level 3, or DC fast charging. So the earlier 2 are AC charging. This is DC charging right into the battery. There are 3 key kinds: CHAdeMO, CCS, and Tesla. And I show the plugs there at the bottom. And these vary by car, by model, and by the charger you're plugged into. And so the range of charging on these is anywhere between 50 and 200 miles in about half an hour. So it's a pretty significant difference. Currently, the Teslas are the quickest in this regard, though some of the Porsche models are catching up to that. So one of the keys about charging is, where do you charge? So the DC fast chargers sometimes get a lot of the attention because, as Americans, we're kind of used to the fact that I can get in my car and just go hit the open road and go wherever I want. It's kind of a, part of the American psyche, I think, even though we don't do it very often, and that's definitely at a whim. But these networks are important because long-range travel is a part of people's lives. And in some cases, it becomes needed for apartment dwellers, condo owners who don't have charging at home. So this map shows, this is from last fall, and this shows something called the Electrify America Network. So many of you may remember the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal from a few years ago. Well, they had to pay a lot of different penalties related to that, but one of them was the requirement to invest $2 billion, that's with a B, $2 billion into EV charging over 10 years. And this is done through a lot of means. They have programs for apartments and condos. They have lots of different mechanisms. But the main one is this network of DC fast chargers all over the United States. And the program has been so successful, they're actually doing it at Electrify Canada, even though it wasn't part of the settlement. They're doing that on their own. So this next slide shows the Tesla supercharger network. So Tesla's kind of the leader here, and unlike most of the manufacturers, they've actually started many years ago building their own network of chargers. So this is from back in March. It's constantly growing, and this network there's actually a huge presence in Europe, in China, in Australia as well. The red dots are active chargers, and the blue dots are where there's planned chargers, and the traffic cones are ones that are under construction. So these are all along, like Electrify America, along major highways and interstates. So it makes it easy to travel. And there are, for both, there are apps and ways to find these from your phone or from the car. So there are also other commercial chargers out there. There's various vendors, Green Lots, EVgo, ChargePoint. And these companies all have apps for your smartphone to find their chargers. And those are very useful. But there's also an app called PlugShare. And it's available as a smartphone app or as a website, plugshare.com. And that's useful for finding chargers. Basically, most chargers that are available to the public are out there on PlugShare. And on PlugShare, you can actually see not only what the charger is, but where it's at. Is it free? Are there fees? Most of them, they all have a rating number from 1 to 10. So it's 10, it's real reliable and it's always running. It's a 1, it's a bit problematic and not well taken care of. You can also tell the app what kind of car you have, what kind of EV you have, and it'll only show you the chargers that work with your car. This is a good way to get a view of, if you look at the EVgo app or Tesla stuff or whomever, you only see their stuff. PlugShare lets you find all the chargers in one convenient place. And it's a great tool for those that aren't EV drivers yet, because it gives you an opportunity to look around, bring up the website, download the app for your smartphone. There's no charge for that. And you can go look and see, well, where do you travel? And are there chargers nearby? One of the things people will say is, well, I don't see chargers. Aren't that many around? Well, the challenge is it's not that there aren't that many around, just you don't see them because you don't need them. And oftentimes they're much smaller than a gas station and they don't stand as much. So you just don't know they're there. So this would allow you to go look and see, grandma's house is 180 miles away. And is there a charger nearby? Is there a charger near where you work or where you frequent? It's a great way to do some early research, maybe get a little more comfortable with the idea of going with an electric car. So a little bit about some of the benefits of EVs. So currently EVs have some amount of a premium cost over a conventional car of the same category, though that's going down quickly. But they have definitely lower operating costs. Fuel costs are much lower. Charging your EV from electricity is much less expensive than gasoline. These numbers are before the current drop in gas prices, but that will be temporary. We just can't compete with an EV when it comes to being quiet. The lack of fumes is great. Also, just the lack of vibration. When I go on a long trip now, it's so much more relaxing in the EV because just the quiet, the lack of fumes, but also the lack of vibration. You're not nearly as fatigued when you get to where you're going. Just by their very nature, EVs have good torque and very good to fantastic acceleration. So one of the things the car companies do, I think it's kind of funny and kind of interesting, is especially with sports cars, they advertise the horsepower of the sports car, and that's interesting. But it's the torque that makes a car go fast or accelerate quickly. And that's what people mostly think about when they think of a fast car. Well, the torque curve on a gasoline car, it has to ramp up from 0 and build over time. But the torque curve on an EV is like a straight line because you have instant torque, the whole amount right off the get-go. So it's a really great acceleration, which isn't just a fun thing it's also can be a safety advantage. When you're merging into traffic on the Beltway, an instant torque of an EV makes that so much less stressful and so much easier to do. So EVs are cleaner than gasoline cars, and I'll get to more of that in a moment. And another benefit is that you're using homegrown electrons. Except for a little bit of Canadian hydro, all that electricity is generated in the U.S., so you're not sending dollars elsewhere around the world to sometimes not so good actors around the world. So this is important more for businesses than it is for individuals, but it can be for individuals as well. One of the things about fuel cost is gasoline is all over the map. As we're seeing today, it can drop really low, but then it can go really, really high as well. So For some people where the budgets are tight, this variability can be really hard to budget for. But especially for businesses who have a large fleet, this becomes a real problem for dealing with costs when the prices change so much. Whereas electricity costs are generally, stay pretty much in line, increasing slightly. Little squiggle you see there is basically based on seasonal variations, but much more consistent than gasoline costs. So I mentioned before about the efficiency of EVs, and so I want to dig into that a little bit deeper. So this chart is from one of our national labs, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and it's called a Sankey diagram, and it shows the inputs of energy and where they go to and the relative sizes. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I want to focus on one thing, and that's this bottom pink area here, transportation. And so basically, this measures energy in something called quads, which is like billions of BTUs. It's just a measure it's a measure of energy used to measure the needs on like nation scales. So in 2018, the US used 28.3 quads of energy for transportation. But the key here is notice the boxes coming out to the right there. The light gray, which is basically waste, was 22.4. And the dark gray, useful work, was 5.95. Basically, 4-to-1, energy was wasted, not used. Now, there's always waste in a system, friction and heat losses, but the inefficiency of gasoline engines really shows itself here. And this shows it more on the car level. So this diagram, see-through diagram from Department of Energy shows a typical gasoline car and the various places where you lose energy, efficiency losses. And they all add up to, in the end, roughly 20% of the energy actually going to power the wheels and moving you forward. Just a huge amount of loss and not very efficient. So now we'll look at an electric vehicle. And you can see here that there are much smaller losses. Your biggest loss is actually on charging and the efficiency of that, which actually is improving over time. Regenerative braking gives you some energy back, which helps raise the number. And so then your ultimate efficiency is around 80%. So this 20% efficient for a gasoline car, 80% for an EV matches that economy-wide diagram I showed 2 slides ago. So I have another example here I want to show just to put this into some numbers on a personal level. And when I did this, I come up with the idea and I put it into a spreadsheet and I'm like, well, this can't be right. And I had to do it a couple of times just to make sure. So this is the before, and then the next slide will show the results. So a old-fashioned incandescent 100-watt bulb, which the young folks on the call may not be familiar with. Today, you would replace that with probably an LED bulb using about 15 watts. That's a huge saving, 85% savings from that LED. And so what I'm going to show is if we just replaced one 100-watt incandescent bulb with a modern LED, if that bulb was used for 5 hours a day on average, how many miles can I drive my EV with the energy savings? So if I was doing this live, I'd ask for some guesses, but I'm just gonna move on. So the answer is over 500 miles of EV driving. So what you have here is that a 100-watt bulb used for 5 hours a day for a year would be 182.5 kilowatt hours. The replacement bulb is only going to be a little over 27, which means your yearly saving is about 155 kilowatt hours a year. Most EVs, it varies a little bit, but get around 3.5 miles per kilowatt, and you do the math, and it's over 500 miles of driving from replacing one 100-watt bulb, sorry about that, that's used 5 hours a day. That is a tremendous savings. And it just shows you how efficient LEDs are and how efficient EVs are. And it's really a great example of, replace all the light bulbs in your house and you can probably save enough to power your car. So I talked about this a little bit more, a little bit earlier, but it's getting a little more detail. So EVs get cleaner over time. So every year the grid gets cleaner. So that EV you buy today will be cleaner in 2 or 3 years. However, for a gasoline car, it's going to get a little bit dirty over time. Wear and tear is going to make the car a little less efficient. Not a lot, but a little bit. We're moving more toward unconventional oil like tar sands, which are dirtier. So the two are going in opposite directions. If you live in an area where the grid isn't that clean, you can always select wind power from various sources for a nominal added cost. Better yet, if you put rooftop solar in your house, with about a dozen panels, you can power your car for about 1,000 miles of driving per month or 12,000 miles a year. So here's that same information, but looked at the big picture level across the United States. So this map is from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it shows the grid in 2014. And so these lines are not really state boundaries, these are grid boundaries. So ERCOT down here, that's mostly Texas, not quite exactly Texas, but mostly Texas. We're in something called the PJM, which is in here. And there's various other grids and subgrids that this shows. The colors are basically grouping grids into color ranges of what is the equivalent miles per gallon a gasoline car needs to get to be as clean as an EV powered from the grid. Now you see in 2014, California was 95. Our area was in the high 40s. Parts of it are in the 70s. Depends on where you're at. But the weighted average across the United States was 73. But pretty much everywhere, it's better. Only a few places is not better than the best car at the time, which was probably a Prius. Now we're going to jump ahead. This is that same kind of map 4 years later for 2018. Almost the entire map is now in the light blue above 50 mile per gallon category. Only all areas are 40 or below. And actually, this one's 49, so it's almost there. The weighted average is now 88 miles per gallon. And the beauty of this is, if you bought an EV in 2014, you've gotten these improvements with a car that's 4 years old. So how often does a car get better over time? Usually, the car doesn't improve over time. It has wear and tear and loses functionality, not gains it. This is one of the benefits of EVs. So here we have a chart showing, and I need to update this. I apologize for not having the latest and greatest, but you can see here we've got a pretty steady ramp up, slow at first, but really accelerating of electric vehicles, battery and plug-in around the world. And what's amazing about this is we started this modern revolution around EVs in 2010, right in the middle of the global financial meltdown. So this started at not the best time from a financial standpoint. So there have been really several periods of EV history. And one of the things I like to do when I'm doing this live is ask people about when they thought the first EV was made. You get all kind of guesses, and nobody gets it unless they've seen it. Someone from an EV world, the EV will talk about this stuff. 1830s. There was a gentleman, I don't know his name, off the top of my head, I forget, unfortunately, but he created an electric vehicle, kind of a buggy, but the batteries were one-time use. They couldn't be recharged. So it was not a commercial enterprise. It was a science project, but that's when it was created. Around the turn of the century, we had, when automobiles first came into being, there was basically a three-way race between gasoline cars, steam-powered cars, and electric cars. And for a while there, EVs were kind of winning out because the crank you had to use to start a gasoline car was really hard to do, and people were known to break their arms trying to crank that starter. And ironically, it was the electric starter motor that gave the gasoline cars the edge, and they ended up winning out. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a foray with the GM's EV1 that people loved, but most of them ended up getting crushed and got squashed. And then the modern advent of EVs right around 2010. So what's going on here and why this explosive growth? Well, one of the reasons is the drop in battery prices. So you can see that per kilowatt hour, battery prices up around $1,000 in 2010, but dropping well below 200 in 2018 and lower still today. Like I mentioned earlier in my talk on Monday night, the key to sustainability efforts is that the price declines are tremendous. And now most of the things we talk about in sustainability have a price advantage, not disadvantage. EVs aren't quite as far along in that curve as, say, solar and wind, but they're getting very close. They're there if you look at it at a life cycle standpoint, over the life of the car. But purchase price is still a little higher up front, but we're getting close to parity. It's only a few years away. So a little bit about larger vehicles. One of the key areas that's starting to take off is electric buses. And these are important for a number of reasons. One, diesel buses are very polluting. We want to do more mass transit. And it also introduces folks to riding an electric vehicle and gives them that experience. China has been the absolute leader in this area. And in 2016, 4 years ago, China was at over 100,000 electric buses. And they had a city, Shenzhen, with 16,000, over 16,000. Their entire fleet was all electric. While in the U.S. at the time, we only had a few hundred. Now that's growing quickly. And I'm proud to say that my county, where I live, Frederick County, Maryland, was the first in the state of Maryland to have electric transit buses and are looking to do more. And this is starting to take off because of the economics. These do cost more up front still, but the life cycle costs are lower, and fleet managers understand that, and they're starting to take notice, and the orders for these things are really picking up. And this map is like the one before, but for diesel buses. And this shows that everywhere in the country, we are basically less than, it's a two-time improvement over diesel, and sometimes it's well over that. So from a climate standpoint, this is a no-brainer. It's not just buses that are happening. So this picture is from an electric garbage truck, a Class 8 garbage truck that was put into service in Seattle just about a year ago. There are other examples of this. And this might seem kind of strange. It's like, well, that's a big vehicle. How can you do that when it's hard to do cars? Well, a garbage truck is actually really kind of a prime vehicle for this space. When you think about it, they don't go very fast. They constantly stop and start, which is where you get a lot of inefficiencies in a gasoline vehicle. And they're hauling a heavy load, which requires torque to get that load moving. And electric motors are very good at torque. So this is a very good fit, and you're starting to see this area is a definite growth area over the next few years. There's actually a case, I don't have a picture, unfortunately, but somewhere in Europe where there's a mining operation where they have this mine where the quarry is at the top of a hill, and they bring the materials down to the valley to unload them and process them. And they built this specially purpose hauler. It's massive. It's like it dwarfs this garbage truck, and it's all electric. And it actually is net positive for energy. So what happens is the vehicle only needs power to go up the hill, but when it does, it's empty. So it doesn't use all that much. When it comes down the hill, it's loaded with tens of thousands of pounds of rock and stuff. So it actually fills the battery up, and it generates more energy on the way down because it's full than it does on the way up going empty. So they have to, when they bring it down to the base, they have to unload the rock and stuff, but also offload some of the electricity and use it to take care of their operations. It's kind of a one-off specialty vehicle, but it's a sign of things to come. So a little bit about EV myths. So I have a couple of things here where in the next, as I close down the next few slides, I'm going to show some things that normally I have handouts for you, but I have a website that I'll get to in a bit where you can go look at these things in detail and download them and share them with folks and use them in hopefully your research and your talking to folks. So there are a lot of myths around EVs. The one I think to me is kind of the funniest is, and I hear this all the time, but won't my electric bill go up? Well, yeah, it will, but your gasoline bill goes away. So depending on how much you drive, you may be trading $100 a month gasoline bill for a $30, EV electric increase. But people, they think about the increase, but forget about the one going away. Let's see here. I'll give you a link to this, so I'm not going to go over every little bit of it. I mentioned number 6 here, the whole tailpipe smokestack argument. That's really been debunked, and the charts I had before show that. So one thing I like to talk about also is that because people hear this a lot, and so I kind of focus on some things that we hear from folks. And we hear this a lot from auto manufacturers. Not quite so much today. This is kind of going away, but occasionally they still talk about it. Well, the car makers will say, well, we would make more EVs, but people want to buy trucks and SUVs. And my question to them is, well, no, wait a minute. If they want to buy trucks and SUVs so much, why do you spend so very much on advertising? Exact numbers are hard to come by, but it looks like in 2017, Ford spent about $2.5 billion in advertising, with over 80% going to trucks and SUVs. So if these are the vehicles people want to buy, why does it spend so much money trying to convince them to do so? Well, the reason is, it's not that people need convinced, it's because they need convinced to buy their brand and to upscale it to higher trim levels. This picture is a truck from 1974, an F-150, back when a truck was a work vehicle. Most trucks were owned by farmers, construction workers, people who had a need to use it as a truck. Well, somewhere in the late 2000s, the U.S. manufacturers realized they could start upscaling these vehicles and really advertising them as a lifestyle choice. And the price difference between a typical truck and all vehicles started to differentiate. And so this data is from around 2015, and you can see that the average price of an F-150 is way higher than the average for all vehicles. And I get from some folks about when I mention I have a Tesla Model 3, they're like, oh, wow, it must be nice to be rich. I'm like, well, wait a minute. That's not the case. I can afford the upfront cost, but the key is that vehicle over a 10-year lifespan will be similar in price to a Camry or an Accord, a typical, middle-class sedan, when you factor in all the savings for fuel and for lower maintenance and such. Also, my Tesla was about the same price as the average F-150. So there are hundreds of thousands of people just in that model alone spend the same amount on vehicles. So when you put it in the grand scheme of things, it's not that expensive compared to what a lot of people spend on cars. So a little bit about choosing an EV. So you've got many choices, many options today. We are still a little limited on trucks and SUVs. However, there's a lot coming very soon. The key right now is, especially if you're on the fence and not sure, think about your driving patterns. I always encourage folks that are considering an EV or really considering any car, create a log or diary of your driving. Think about how much you go each week, what's your typical driving look like during the course of a week, how many days do you have abnormal patterns where you're going a really long distance, how often you go on long trips, because that's important to figure out when you choose your vehicle. I mentioned before, PlugShare can help you see where charging exists today at locations that you frequent. So, if, and it isn't just where you're going. So if you're going to grandma's house or a friend's house that's 180 miles away, and you have a 220-mile car, well, you can get there, but how do you get back? Well, it may not be just charging near where your friend lives or your relative lives. Maybe there's a restaurant you like on the way where you can charge. Think about your path and where there might be charging, and just realize that more is coming all the time. So you're just looking for what's there already. Also, don't let that special case that happens once a year be a roadblock. I've talked to so many people that say, well, I need a truck because I want to be able to haul something. Well, how often do you bring something home that needs a truck? Well, 2 years ago, we bought a new couch. And 3 years ago, we bought a new refrigerator. I think that's about it. Well, buying a vehicle and paying all that premium for that kind of vehicle for just those couple times doesn't make financial sense and definitely doesn't make climate sense. You always rent something for those special occasions. One example of this is from a few years ago, one of our members, he had a pretty long commute, like 60 miles one way. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of long range cars other than Tesla, which was out of his price range. And so he ended up getting a Nissan Leaf with 85, 90 miles of range. But it turned out that he could charge at work. So charge up at home, fill up the battery, go to work, plug in an 9 hour day, back to full again, come home, plenty of cushion for doing an errand or so. On those odd times where he needed to go on a long trip to visit folks, he would just rent a car, and the savings in gas alone paid for that easily with more to spare. So you got to think about your patterns and think about what your needs are. So this is that sheet I mentioned, one of them. So if you go to the website listed there, evadc.org/evinfo, this sheet, the myth sheet, and a few others are there as PDF files available for download. And so this sheet, we refer to it as our info sheet. It's got all of the fully electric vehicles on one side, and on the other side, it's got all of the plug-in electric vehicles. It has complete stats and numbers and prices. There's pictures of the vehicles, and various information on both sides around charging and plug share and incentives and various things. So it's a really good resource. We try to keep it up to date as possible. One thing to be aware of is that it's always a moving target. So we updated this back in January. There'll be new vehicles. We try to update it about once a year. Also on the website, we have the archive of our older sheets. So if you're kind of curious, you can see that we did this, I think it's 2011 or 12, maybe somewhere in that range. That sheet was one-sided and there wasn't that much on it. It's got a lot more, and it's getting tough to fill it on one page front to back.
That's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem to have. Yeah, we were talking about that. We had our meeting. EVADC meets the third Wednesday of the month, and we've been meeting virtually over Zoom and during these times. We were talking about with all the cars coming out, how we're going to fit everything on this. And at sometime we'll probably drop off some of the super low range plug-in hybrids, because there are a few out there that get like 8 miles of range, and quite frankly, it's a good attempt. It's good that they're attempting, but it's not that practical. So, in summary, electric vehicles, and more importantly, the electrification of vehicles, is underway and growing fast. One thing I didn't mention was airplanes, but believe it or not, electric airplanes are on the way. There are models in development, under testing. One of our members actually recently moved to Arizona, but he has a 4-seater, kind of a Piper Cub-sized electric plane on order with a deposit. He expects to get it sometime in the next, I think, 18 months. There's a lot of work going on here. It's all about the key right now is getting the weight of the batteries down. And so we should see the small personal size planes very soon. And that's actually going to be very important, because one of the things that's happening about aviation is it's gotten very, very expensive to learn to fly and to fly a personal plane. And so the number of people that fly like that is way down. That's putting pressure on the industry to get new pilots. And electric airplanes will make the cost of flying like that or renting a plane a lot less. And there should be a renaissance in personal aviation, which is good, because we've got a lot of pilots that are in that retirement bracket. After those kind of planes, the short haul planes, under 500 miles, are probably next. And then the big planes like 747s, not sure if they'll ever get fully electric, but they'll probably be like a hybrid model where they can cruise on electric, but have a traditional engine for landing and takeoff. So EVs of all kinds, but thinking about cars here, they're quiet, they're efficient, great torque. Fun fact on the Tesla, their Model S, their big sedan, Tesla's kind of used that as some of the acceleration is a marketing thing to try to get a lot of awareness and get people excited, and to get car people excited. And in the top trim on that car, which is called ludicrous mode, and it's well named, the vehicle goes 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds. So that is just incredibly fast. Well, when they finally hit that number, there's a lot of buzz in the Tesla community and the EV community because someone did the math. And if you drop the car from a plane and timed how long it would take to get to 60 in free fall, it's like 2.6 seconds. So the line became that the car's faster than gravity, which is kind of a fun thing. But all EVs are very quick. My Chevy Bolt, and I see that some people have some Bolts, Bolt with a B in the chat. I was looking up some stuff and trying to compare it, and I found, for those of us old enough to remember, Magnum PI from the 80s, the Ferrari he drove in a drag race to 60, the Bolt would win by 1/10 of a second. So that's kind of amazing too. There are dozens of models available and a lot more on the way. So think about your patterns. Maybe if you're in the market for a car and you can wait a year or two, you're going to have, and because you're not quite sure, gee, I want to go electric, but I want a model that doesn't exist yet. Look what's out there. If you can wait a year or two, it's a good chance it'll be there. If you're not sure, you can reach out to those of us at EVADC, and we can let you know if something's coming that you're looking for. And like I said, automakers are investing billions in this space. And I mentioned Volkswagen a few slides ago about their Dieselgate scandal and their Electrify America program. In hindsight, while they did a very, very bad thing and they got penalized very heavily for it, it may end up being in the long run, in the macro level, a good result in the end. They are investing billions in electrification. They realize they have a reputation they need to restore, and we don't have the proof yet because the cars aren't there. It's taking. I mean, they're on the way, but it looks like they're trying to redeem themselves and go electric in a big way. So here's hoping that they carry through and the space. Someone has to give Tesla some competition and so keep moving forward. So that's my slides for tonight. I welcome your questions. And thank you for attending.
Thank you, Ron. We have a couple questions here. Madeline wants to know, how do electric vehicles handle in the ice and the snow and with weight in the car?
Yeah, good question. So it's going to depend on the vehicle. But in general, EVs actually have an advantage in the sense that, so those batteries we talk about, they're kind of heavy. That affects the range. But in ice and snow, it actually becomes an advantage. The weight gives you more traction. The weight is typically down low, which is even better. And so they actually do quite well in the ice and snow. Well, ice is going to be a problem for any car, but let's say snow. Many EV models now have options for all-wheel drive. So all the Teslas can be had as a rear-wheel drive, or some of them are only all-wheel drive. A few of them can be had as rear-wheel drive. But I know that some of the Audi models and Porsche models have options for all-wheel drive. And the beauty of all-wheel drive in an electric car is that it's not a mechanical system; it's all electronic. So I mentioned we have the Bolt and the Model 3. We still have our old 2001 Subaru that our daughter uses for college, and it's all-wheel drive, which is great. But in that car, it's mechanical, so it's less efficient than it would be otherwise. Whereas there's some loss of efficiency sometimes in an EV, but not nearly as much for all-wheel drive because it's all electronic and it can switch to the top of the wheel much, much faster than a mechanical system can.
So we had another question from Madeline. How hard is it, Ron, to find service for electric vehicles?
The better question is, how often do you actually need service? So typically you are going to go back to your dealer for service, but quite frankly, you don't need that much service. So there are some things that are common across EVs and gasoline cars. So tires, shocks, things like that are going to be in a similar kinds of time frame. Brakes are going to be similar in terms of need for service, but the frequency is lower because with regenerative braking, you're using the brake pads a lot less, And so your brakes may last 2, even 3 times as long. Tires, brake shocks, those you can go to most any car place. Though some places might be a little nervous about an EV just because they haven't seen it before. But for things that are related to the EV system itself, that you're going to have to go back to the dealer. That we're starting to see. There's a place in Tacoma Park called RS Automotive. It is a gas station that's gone all electric. They got rid of the gas pump. They now have EV charging. They service EVs. So we're starting to see a few special places focus on EV service. But the big challenge for those folks is that there's just not a lot of service needed. So it's gonna be mostly for back to your dealer for at least for the future, short-term future.
Gotcha. David wanted to know, can you speak a little bit about the used car market for EVs?
Yeah, good question. So on that link we have that on the EVADC.org/EV info page, there is a one-page handout on buying a used Nissan Leaf, and we're actually working on some other content for other cars. There is actually a pretty decent market for some of the used EVs and plugins because early on in the 2010 to 2014, 15 range, a lot of folks that were early adopters, myself included, we leased our first EVs because we knew the market was going to change really quickly. We were looking for those fast-paced improvements and didn't want to get stuck behind. Well, that meant there's a lot of still very good EVs out there. Not as long of a range, but a very good bargain in price. So used Leafs that are at the 84 versus an 110 range model can be had for a very low price. Now there may be some battery loss in those. You got to check them out really well. But they make a great commuter car. I had a coworker one time I mentioned about EVs and she was talking about getting a car for her son. And I said, well, a used EV would be great for a 16-year-old because it's limited range, so they can't go very far, and you get one super inexpensive. And so that's an option for some use cases. So if your use case is right and you don't need the super long range, especially if it's your second car, there's a lot of choices out there. Look for used Leafs. Used Chevy Volt are a good option. It's only partial electric, but the prices can be really good if you can find them out there. And so there is a market for them as people upgrade to the newer models, and the pace of change continues to accelerate.
Great. Margie wanted to know, do EV vehicles come with portable chargers?
Good question. So pretty much every EV comes with a charge cord with the car. Now, for a lot of EVs, that's a level 1 charge cord. So it's something you plug into a normal 110 outlet and then plug it into the car. And so if you're getting a plug-in hybrid, or if your range needs are modest, that may be all you need, and just use that. You can always buy a second one because it's maybe a hassle to get it out of the car every time. You want to leave it in your garage or your driveway. Some cars, Teslas, for example, and a few others, that mobile cord that comes with the car is actually a level 2 charger as well. You have adapters to plug it into, say, a campground outlet for an RV where you can charge at a faster rate. That's not as common, but that happens on some cars. But they all come with at least a 110 plug.
Okay. Richard had 2 questions. The first question is, he wants to know, what are the typical costs that are incurred when using chargers, such as like a Tesla, public chargers, things like that?
So good question. So first I'll mention that there is a cost for charging at home. If you need something more than that 110 charging, that level 2 charger you're going to get put in either in your garage. Most of them can go outside. There's no problem plugging in the rain. That's perfectly. I've done it, but many times it's perfectly fine to do and safe to do. That level 2 charger you're going to buy for your home, when I bought mine back in 2012, it was $995, and it was pretty bare bones. You can now get a very nice one with all kind of bells and whistles for $500, and cheaper ones even less. The great thing about those is they're going to work with. There is a Tesla version for Teslas that only works with the Teslas, but otherwise you can get one that works with any car, including Teslas. And you can so I have one charger for the two cars, and we just choose whichever one we need to plug in. So the key there is going to be your setup. In my case, the power panel was in the garage, so the wiring was pretty inexpensive. If your breaker box is in the basement and you're putting in your garage, it could get a little pricey there to run the wires. Out and about charging, it's kind of, there's not one easy answer to that. It's kind of all over the map. There's a lot of places that offer free charging, especially at level 2, for two reasons, really. One, it's because it's their mission to be sustainable. So like Whole Foods and Mom's Organic Market, they have a lot of free charging because that's their target audience, and so they offer it as an amenity. Other places do it because they want you to stay and shop. If you need to, if you're going to stay there and plug in for an hour, you're going to stay and shop, maybe grab some lunch, whatever. So that, maybe $1 worth of electricity is worth it to keep you there shopping. For other places, the costs vary. And so there are a lot of different rules. It varies by state. In some states, only a utility can sell power by the unit. And so in those states, you can't sell power by the kilowatt. You got to just basically sell it by time, which is a little bit unfortunate because different cars charge at different rates. So if you have a really slow charging car, you end up paying a higher price in those situations. The DC fast charging is the one where it's particularly an issue in that the price is vary widely. In some cases, it can be pretty equivalent to your cheapest charging is always going to be at home pretty much. In many cases, that DC fast charging can actually push you over to be more expensive than gas, but that's only in the worst cases. The key there is to look at PlugShare would help you look at how it's paid for, whether it's by time or by kilowatt, and if so, how much, or if it's free.
Okay. And he had a second question. He wanted to know, how long do the car batteries last, and what are the typical replacement costs if your battery fails?
So for most of the EVs out there, they have not been out there long enough to see a big turnover in batteries. There were some issues, and there is a little bit of a caution on, especially the early Leafs, because they had passive cooling, and in some, especially in hot climates, they had some degradation. But I know folks that have, the best example we have are the Chevy Volt and the early Teslas, where people have had them for 6, 7, 8 years now, and they're seeing nominal degradation a little bit, a few percentage points, but nominal degradation over that time frame. Pretty much across the board, you get a warranty of it varies, but usually some form of X% capacity after X number of years or Y number of miles. So it'll be maybe 70% capacity for 8 years or 100,000 miles, things like that. Most batteries do much better than that warranty. And if they're going to fail, they fail in the warranty period. If they fail, catastrophically. The key on batteries and longevity is taking care of them. So basically, you can charge your car as you need to, but if you come home and it's it's a 100-degree day, and you get home at 5 o'clock and it's super hot, don't put your car in the garage, shut the door, and charge it, and just put it under stress. I mean, if you do it one time, and it's not gonna that one time isn't gonna hurt it. But if you did it a lot, it just puts the battery under more stress and leads to more potential for problems. Additionally, batteries like to be in that sweet spot of between 20% charged and 80% charged. So especially if you have a long range car, and almost all the cars have a feature where you can say, default the charge to be only part way to full. And so for me, with both our Bolt and the Tesla, we plug it in. We don't plug it in every day. If it gets down below, usually it has to go below half unless we're going somewhere the next day before we plug it in. And then unless we're going on a long trip, we don't charge it to full. We charge it 80%, which on the Tesla is 260 miles, and unless I'm going on a trip. I'm not going that far in a day anyway. So those kind of precautions can just help make the battery last longer and just take better care of it. As far as replacement cost, there aren't a lot of good numbers because there just haven't been a lot of replacements done. Most of the replacements, like even on the Teslas that have been around since, 20, like most of them came out 2012, 2013, you're just barely hitting the time when they're out of warranty. So most replacements were, you have that, you have those failures that happen that are they're replaced under warranty. What I can say is that with the dramatic declines in battery prices, costs will be much lower than from now as to when you would need it. So that's the best I can tell you today.
Okay, thanks, Ron, with that. We had one more question, it looks like, and this question is from Sandra. It looks like she has a special case here. She says her husband uses a wheelchair. He drives a van with a ramp. He's been told that he cannot get an electric vehicle because the floor has to be dropped. Do you see if that would be changed in the future?
I'm sure we'll see more options that'll fit that use case. The one I would suggest looking into right now is that Chrysler makes a minivan called the Pacifica. And it's a plug-in hybrid minivan. It has a electric range of 30 some miles and pretty decent gas mileage for a minivan when in gas mode. So I don't know if they can do conversions of that one to support a wheelchair or not, but it might be possible. So that'd be the one I'd look at right now. Otherwise, it's gonna, we're gonna have to get more models out there, and I don't have any specifics as to when something's coming that fits that particular use case.
Okay. Well, I think that was our last question.
Sandra, if she thinks about, if you're looking at it in the future, and when you get the information about all the presentations and stuff, make a note of my email address, and 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever you're thinking about it, drop me an email and I'll let you know if there's any new information.
All right, that sounds great. I think that was our last question, so I'm going to turn it back over to Brandon now.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we're a little bit past the top of the hour. Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate your time tonight. A lot of good questions too. So this webinar has been electric cars are great for you and the climate. All you wanted to know about EVs and more. This was the 4th webinar of our first ever St. Francis of Assisi Eco Summit. So for everyone watching tonight, thank you very much for attending, especially those who have come out every night so far. We saw a few of you, noticed a few of you in the chat there. Thank you very much. It really means a lot to the team who spent so much time putting this summit together to share these, the topic tonight and all the other topics that we've covered this week so far. As I've mentioned in previous webinars, you should be receiving an email with the link to the replay. But unfortunately, that automated replay can only be accessed by people who were actually registered for. So it's not one that you can really share with somebody who didn't register for the webinars. But within the next week or so, I'll be editing the webinar recordings a little bit and uploading them to YouTube. So once that happens, the Care for Creation Committee will be sending you some information on where to find those videos. And that will be a link that you can share with family and friends, anybody else who might be interested in this. And I could definitely see how a topic like the one here tonight, a lot of great information. There's a lot of the questions that were asked, and the things that Ron covered were things that I hear when I'm talking to people who are friends of mine who are thinking about, should I get an EV or look into that? And there's just a lot of, the myths and the misunderstandings. So this was a really good topic. Do want to note that Ron shared at least a link or two in there, and I think his email address and some other information. We will actually pull all that information together as well. So in the next week or two, as we're sending out some follow-up information and the links to the YouTube videos, we will include that as well. So you will definitely have that information. And sounds like, Ron, you'd be happy if people reached out to you and got a hold of you if they had more questions.
Oh yeah, definitely. And once we get past this pandemic time, everyone's welcome to our monthly meeting. And if there's one thing that EV people like to do is talk about their cars. So
excellent. Speaking of email and sending stuff out, one final thing to note is Please note that when you register for the webinar, you are automatically added to our St. Francis of Assisi Care for Creation email list. Trust me, even though you've been getting lots of reminders about the webinars each day, I do know that we're sending those out. We won't be bombarding you with email after the summit, and we'll try to make everything we send both valuable and actionable. But if you really don't want to receive email from us, there is an unsubscribe link in the footer of every email we send to that list. So once we get past the summit and you start getting emails from us, if you decide you don't want to hear from us, just click that link. You'll be unsubscribed and the emails will stop, I promise. So thanks again for attending, and don't miss tomorrow morning's webinar. Tomorrow's webinar is not at 7 o'clock. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning, and Alita Daniels will be coming back to us. Alita was here talking to us about composting earlier in the week, and she's back to talk about her work partnering with Prince William County government. Alita works with an organization called Keep Prince William Beautiful, and the webinar tomorrow is entitled Citizen Science. So Keep Prince William Beautiful, they run programs that are centered on encouraging and educating community members on how to be good environmental stewards. So you'll learn more about what they do for Prince William County, but also if you're not in Prince William County, you will learn what you can do wherever you live to maintain a more clean, green, and beautiful place. So drop by tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. or catch it on the replay if that time just doesn't work for you. And with that, we'll bring this webinar to an official close. I have been Brandon Jubar, your host this evening. One more shout out to Ron Kaltenbaugh. Ron, thank you very much for speaking to us a second time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you all. Yep. Thanks everybody for watching, for spending the time with us this evening. Until tomorrow morning, Scott and I bid you adieu. God bless. Thank you for caring for our common home. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night all.